Good morning.
All right, welcome back, grade 10s. Before we jump into the test, let's see if there's any questions. Is this?
No, it's not
I have to hit the little button. There we go. Yeah, no, just a second. There it kicks in. All right, welcome back, grade 10s. Before we jump into the test, let's make sure that we take care of any outstanding review questions you might have. So, fire away. Any questions last thing while you're studying? Any vocabulary, case studies, terms, people? I'm going to fall on my stool there. That's not good. Any questions that you might have? Doesn't seem like it. All right. Well then, we have a pile of exams and a pile of Scantrons. Don't take from the Social Studies 9 review package. But come up, grab one of each of the booklet and multiple choice. Maybe come up in rows. So let's start with this row. So we don't have a flood of people standing super close. So what we're going to do, since we have 25 questions and like 75 hours to write them, we are going to go through the test once together. And when we go through it together, you may want to, this row can go up. You may want to do some annotating on the booklet. Maybe if you think the answer is B for one, maybe circle B, put a little happy face if you know it's B. Let's get this row and go up next. And then after we go through the test once together, then I'll encourage you to go back over it yourself. There may be some people that are done at that point, but I would encourage you to go back over it yourself. At some point it'll be lunchtime, and then we'll come back from lunch. And then after lunch, this row can go on up. After lunch, you'll go through it again. And ultimately, by 12:25, I think, let's get the last row, I guess, to go up to. By 12:25, you should have had lots of time to look at 25 questions. So we're going to read through it once together, and then we will give you some time to look at it on your own. So today's multiple choice test is a midterm for related issues 3 and 4. It's the last half of the course. And I purposely picked 25 questions. You may remember I had a test that had more. I had one that had 40, I had one that had 60. I probably have about 300 questions to pick from. But I purposely picked a test with 25 questions so we can focus on the process a little bit. We've done a lot with the process of A1 this year, but I want to do more with the process of multiple choice. So, let's go through the test together. You may want to, again, while we go over it, if you're like, well, number one is definitely this letter, then you may want to annotate or highlight stuff as you go. So as you can see, when you open up the booklet, there's a lot of information for source 1. And source 2 has a quote. It's not long, but it's not short either. So I'm going to skip those two things for now, and I'm going to see why am I looking at them. So number 1 says, given that Gandhi once, it should say like declared or decried, that poverty was the most severe form of oppression. So I pause, poverty, most severe form of oppression. I remember talking about that. He would be most concerned with which assertion from source 2. So we don't have to look at source 1 yet to do number 1. We're only looking at source 2. So being that Gandhi believes that poverty is the most severe form of oppression. So if I have a highlighter, for number 1, I might highlight poverty, worst form of oppression. And I'm trying to match that with something from source 2 that he'd be most concerned with. So, these are our options. I grew up where far too many people live day to day without elemental needs like food and shelter. I grew up where far too many people live day to day without elemental needs like food and shelter. Would he be most concerned if that shows poverty? Everybody needs beauty as well as bread. places to play and pray in, where nature may heal and give strength to body and soul. C, we already have, thanks to technology, development, skills, the efficiency of our work, enough resources to satisfy all human needs. And D, but we don't have enough resources, and we are unlikely ever to have to satisfy human greed. So we're trying to find between those four answers, which one is matching up with the idea that poverty was the most severe form of oppression, and which of those four things would be most concerning to someone who thinks that. So, if the word Gandhi throws you off, then just say, if you think poverty is the most severe form of oppression, which one of those four observations is most troublesome? So if Russ McBride thinks poverty is horrible, poverty is oppression, which one of those four things, in its essence, is showing the poverty at its most extreme? So you got number one that says, I grew up where far too many people live day to day without their elemental needs like food and shelter. We did that hierarchy, right? Food and shelter right at the bottom. So if you don't have those things, you can't really move up to self-actualization. You're going to have a very limited life. So definitely we see a pull to A because there's poverty there, right? B, everybody needs beauty as well as bread, places to play and pray, where nature may heal and give strength to body and soul. Well, praying and playing are further up Maslow's hierarchy of needs. So yes, you can be impoverished religiously, but that is different than being impoverished in terms of food and water. So which one's more severe in terms of Gandhi's quote there? And then C, we already have, thanks to technology, lots of good stuff. I'm not sure I see poverty in C. C might be your worst answer. I'm not going to give away all the answers, but C might be the worst answer here, right? It doesn't really talk about poverty there. I see some poverty in A. We don't have food and shelter. I see poverty in B. We don't have a place to play. We don't have a place to pray. There's definitely poverty in both A and B. C is saying we got lots of stuff. And then D, but we don't have enough resources, and we are unlikely ever to have to satisfy human greed. So D is saying we're always going to have poverty. So what's more concerning then? So you can put down some thoughts before we move on to number 2. I'll give you a minute to wrestle with that. Remember, the M is for the maybe. Happy face is like, frick, I know this one. This is definitely whatever letter. Then you know you don't have to go back. And that test booklet, that's yours. So like if you're gonna cross something off, like don't be gentle about it. Just cross it off and say, I know it's not C. Just like be vicious with your crossing off. All right. So you will get a chance to come back to that. Number 2, responding to claims that economic liberalism. So this is where I pause and say, okay, economic liberalism. What is that? What is that? And then I'm like, capitalism. Okay, it's capitalism. I know what capitalism is. It's free market. So responding to claims that capitalism has only magnified global economic disparity. Capitalism creates more disparity. And economists like Milton Friedman would use the data in the chart from source 1 to support a claim. So in order to get number 2 right, you're going to need to know about Milton Friedman. And then we go to that chart. I'm just going to rip my booklet apart so I can look at 2 pages at once. I'm not too concerned about keeping its structural integrity. So would he be most concerned that since 1944 the world has benefited from unprecedented growth due to economic freedom and opportunity? Would support the claim, it says support the claim, that since 44 the world has benefited from unprecedented growth. So if he's a free market guy, then 1944, Bretton Woods, trying to bring the free market to the world, there is a pull to A then, right? Responding to claims that economic liberalism has only created more disparity, Milton Friedman would say, hey, Since 1944, we've seen lots of growth. Seems to make sense. Because since 1944, that's when they put free trade globally. B, consumers can access a great variety of products. Developing nations have found their niche. And due to innovation and freedom, our global economic future looks bright. Again, that might be something a free market person might say. But do either A and B reflect the data in the chart from 1? Because in the question it says, an economist like Milton Friedman would use the data in the chart to support the claim. I'm not sure that there's any data in that chart that shows anything about consumers can access a great variety of products. They would argue that, but it doesn't fit the criteria of the question. You see that part? It doesn't fit that criteria. Where there is poverty, and there is some poverty in that chart. Where there is poverty, I see the unequal distribution of capitalism. The solution to poverty is more capitalism. Somebody who likes capitalism might say that. Economic liberalism is flawed because it is an invention of man. Well, if he likes economic liberalism, he's not likely to say D. So key to getting number 2 right will be to understand that it says an economist like Milton Friedman, and you need to figure out, well, what does Friedman think? And it's also that idea would use the data in the chart to support the claim. It's leading you there by saying you have to use the data in the chart. Having said that, I think the answer becomes more apparent. So, put some notes next to it, and then we'll move on to the next one. This is the speed that I would be going at too, right? I'm trying to model the speed. It's not a fast speed. Combining the reflection from source 2. I pause and I kind of look at it and I think about it again. Okay, so that's anti-poverty, right? With the data from source 1, we can conclude that the speaker most likely grew up in sub-Saharan Africa. That seems very specific. So I have to go to source 1 and look at sub-Saharan Africa. And there's more people living in poverty there in 2002 than there were in 1981. Those things are getting worse. I understand human needs. I grew up where far too many people live day to day without elemental needs. Of the places listed, that's the place where far too many people are living like that now. So there's definitely a connection there. The success that we have seen is not environmentally sustainable. I love words like biosphere and ecological footprint. I don't see either of those on the page. The chart's not telling me about water or air pollution, so there's no pull to the environment. In order to have a future, we need all nations to embrace globalization. Is he pro-globalization? If so, then C is your answer. D, as a result of our innovative nature, we will achieve global social progress. If he speaks to innovative nature, if there's a pull, if you can highlight and say, this is where he's saying mankind's innovative, then it's D. If you can highlight something and say, this is where he's saying globalization's good, then it's C. If you can look at chart 1 and say, wow, there's a lot of poverty in sub-Saharan Africa, then it's A. So, maybe look it over, and then we'll move on. So you'll get a chance to go back, because again, 25 questions, 3-hour class, we have lots of time here. kind of focus on the process. But now you've got skin in the game. This is where 12.5% of your mark. So, let's go to number 4. The most appropriate title for the table. Remember, read the question first, read the stem first. The most appropriate title for the table would be, and I look up and I see 1920s to 1940s, 1940s to 1990s, 2000 to present. So I see things like war leaves a legacy of upheaval and tension, leads to Bretton Woods. But now we're seeing the reemergence of isolationism. We have the rise of communism, IMF, World Bank, rise of extremism, the fallacy of economic protectionism. We have the WTO. So it's not necessarily that, this leads to that, leads to that. They're just saying these are 4 things that really identified with this era. These are 4 things that really, I knew that was going to happen. Identify with that era. And then those are 4 things that identify with the modern era. Get rid of that. So the most appropriate title for the table would be A Foundation of Freedom in a World of Control. I'm just laughing because, these are all questions I made, so, sometimes you hate yourself, right? A Foundation of Freedom in a World of Control. In order for it to be A, you have to be able to look at the table and see some stuff for freedom. So you could make an economic argument that Bretton Woods, IMF, World Bank, WTO are all based on economic liberalism, economic freedom, in a world of control. So in order for it to be A, there's got to be something up there that talks about a world of control. If you can find it, A is your answer. B, building towards the global common good. So common good, often associated with collectivism, maybe communism, or maybe in this case of the 21st century, common good might be collaborating, cooperating to tackle environmental issues. I think I might see some stuff like Brexit up there. Anti-WTO, rise of extremism, reemergence of isolationism that may or may not fit B, quite clearly, one way or the other. The fleeting paradigm shift to cooperation, the fleeting paradigm shift. So we're going to try to do a paradigm shift towards cooperation, and then it's fleeting, meaning it's not lasting. Are we seeing a fleeting paradigm shift to cooperation? So fleeting means something that doesn't last, like a summer romance, right? A fleeting paradigm shift. So if it's C, then you see a paradigm shift, and then you see like a shift back, right? And then D, reasons why we need to work together. So if that's the case, then there should be listings, like under the 20s to 40s, we see lots of reasons why we need to work together, like rise of communism, war becomes unthinkable. In 2000 to present, you've got things like rise of extremism. But if you were circling those 12 boxes, how many fit D? How many fit C? Do more of them talk about a shift to and then away from cooperation? Or do more of them talk about the need to work together? So this might be one that you put a little question mark by and you come back to, if you don't have an answer that's slapping you in the face. So the most appropriate title, for it to be a title for the table, it really has to be an umbrella title that fits everything within the table, right? So if the title for the table was, the best defenseman in NHL history, then everything in that table has to be a defenseman. You can't put Mario Lemieux or Wayne Gretzky on the list. They're not defensemen. So you need a title that fits everything there. And I would argue that there's only one possible one. So number 5 and 6, we have not a short quote, but not a long one either. But again, I'm not going to want to read it more than once, so I'm going to see why I'm reading it. A possible inspiration for the sentiment expressed. So when I read it, I have to figure out, okay, why is this being said? And then in context, which of the following phrases from the source would be most troubling to a supporter of trade liberalism, capitalism? So a possible inspiration for the sentiment expressed above would be the Trump administration deciding to renegotiate NAFTA to better serve the interests of U.S. corporations. So I'm gonna pause, to look up there and see if I see that. It is the mandate of democratic governments to fulfill their contract with the people to whom they represent. In fact, it is the transparent implementation of the will of the people that legitimizes the role. And some may say intrusion of the government in our daily lives. But I would argue that democracy is being challenged not by despotism, but by the real global threat, capitalism. Governments around the global village continue to place transnational interests ahead of those of their own citizens, sometimes with catastrophic results. The solution isn't easy, but we must close our borders to these insidious influences. Not to give away too much, but this is anti-transnational. This is anti-corporation. This is anti-capitalism. This is suggesting that the government has been corrupted by corporations. So now I have to look down through those 4 things and say, well, which one matches that sentiment? Which one possibly inspired that? Well, looking at D, that's got to be the worst answer ever. That's McBride trying to be somewhat creative at the end, saying, I need another one. Queen Elizabeth II proclaiming her son, Charles, Prince of Wales, as her heir, as the leader of the British Commonwealth, and prophesizing the rebirth of global cooperation, says nothing about corporations there. Talks maybe about despotism, depending upon how you feel about monarchy, has nothing to do with corporations. It can't be D, right? So then Prime Minister Trudeau using the influence of the PMO to promote the interests of his friends and family. We see corruption, I don't see corporations. So now we got it down to 2. Looking at the nuances within the quote, it should pull you to either A or B. So when you go back, you should be saying, you know what, I think this country is the United States. I think this person is talking about an event that happened in the US. Or, this sure sounds like what we saw in Bolivia. So go back and consider A and B and say, what's the location of this quote? What is more likely to be the location? This next one should be interesting. So it says in context, meaning we kind of got to go back and read, right? In context, go back, find it, read around it. The answer might be somewhere around it. In context, which of the following phrases from the source would be most troubling to a supporter of capitalism, to a supporter of free trade? It is the mandate of democratic governments to fulfill their contract with the people to whom they represent. So within that quote, I'm saying, do I see anything that's a statement against corporations, against capitalism, against free trade? Not explicitly. B, in fact, it is the transparent implementation of the will of the people that legitimizes the role, and some say intrusion of the government in our lives. C, democracy is being challenged, not by despotism, but by the real global threat, capitalism. Or D, we must close our borders to these insidious influences. So, if you're a supporter of trade liberalism, meaning you like free trade, which one's the biggest threat to having free trade in the future? Which one of those things would, if implemented, mean the end of free trade? So you probably have it narrowed down to two, and then just see if you can see the connection. All right, let's move on to the cartoon. Number 7. The ideological perspective of the cartoonist can be used to illustrate that. Okay, so ideological perspectives, that's something we've talked about all term. I'm not too intimidated by that being in the STEM. Let's consider my 4 options. Governments are powerless to control foreign influences. So I'm gonna, what might that look like? And then I look at it. I claim this land in the name of the magistrate, and then I structurally adjust this land in the name of economic growth. And the one cartoon shows like a monarch symbol, maybe the crown of England, and then here you have the IMF. So I see what they're doing. This is some historical garb, some historical clothing. This is a contemporary individual. He's claiming it for the king or the monarch or the queen. He's claiming it through the IMF in terms of economic growth, capitalism. Governments are powerless to control foreign influences. Maybe. I don't see the government that this guy is claiming this from here, and I don't see the government. We can, there's an implicit inference that he's taking this from a government. We don't even know if anybody lived on this island before they claimed it, right? It could be an uninhabited island. So, I'm not sure I see governments. There's a lack of public government control over transnational corporations. If I see transnational corporations here and here, then maybe B is my answer. But if I don't see transnational corporations here and here, then B is not my answer. It's as simple as that. C, like the monarchy, in other times and places, the corporation is today's dominant institution. So if you believe the corporation is attached to this economic growth that the IMF is structurally adjusting that place for, if the IMF is an instrument of corporations, and if you see that their juxtaposition here is between the monarchy and corporations, then maybe C is your answer. And then finally, although their reasons have changed, we definitely have seen changing reasons, globalization is still shaped by the powerful imposing their will on others. So here's the thing. There's 2 good answers. But based upon the details within the source, there's one answer that's better than others. So there's 2 good answers. That's by design. But you have to look at the details within the cartoon and say, which one's the better answer? Which one deals with the nuances of the cartoon? The details. See lots of people flipping their page, so maybe I should flip my page too. Number 8 to number 10, we have 4 citizens. Oh, didn't want that. Where did the test go? Where did the test go? I'm going to have to click on it again. Alright, just give me 1 second. Instructions. That's that test. Classwork. Midterm. Alright, let's get back to that. Okay, so we had 4 citizens. The speakers disagree the most in their beliefs about the extent to which. So, all 4 of them are talking about something. So we have to look to the 4 speakers, the 4 citizens, and say, what are they talking about that they disagree about? Economic liberalism is a rational and sustainable economic system for the world. So is that what they're disagreeing about? To what extent is economic liberalism okay? World leaders should focus on humanitarianism. So I'm going to highlight humanitarianism, and if all 4 are talking about humanitarianism, B is my answer. The biosphere can sustain our growing consumer demands. I'm going to highlight biosphere. If all 3 are talking about the environment, C is my answer. B and C are different. Humanitarianism, environmentalism. We should embrace globalization. All speakers disagree with to what extent we should embrace globalization. D is kind of like a bigger umbrella that could fit anything. So if they're all talking about globalization, but not specifically just about environmentalism or about humanitarianism, maybe D is my answer. A is just about economics, right? Economic liberalism. So now it's a matching game. Now I have to read through them and say, what is each citizen talking about? So citizen 1. So while I read through them, you might want to say, okay, is this talking about A, economics, B, humanitarianism, C, environmentalism, or D, just globalization in general? Throughout the world, the deal was, we left the world a better place than we found it. That was progress, the will, the rule of law, anything. It was our covenant with our children and grandchildren. My children weren't angry with me for breaking the covenant. They were too busy trying to stay alive to waste energy on blame, trying to negotiate their way through food riots and refugee camps and the collapse of society. But I think my grandchildren would have been angry had they survived into adulthood. Citizen 2. Why are American cities designed so that it's almost impossible not to have a car? Why were 100 railways in cities like New York, Philadelphia, and Los Angeles bought up and then deliberately destroyed? Why did the electric car get scrapped? Why were we, along with Australia, the only 2 countries not to sign the original Kyoto Climate Treaty? Why was an oil company lobbyist allowed to change official government reports on global warming? Why was the same PR firm employed by the tobacco industry used to persuade the public that smoking is healthy, then employed by the oil industry to convince us that there was still doubt about climate change? Alternate energy has been available for 50 years. Why have we barely used it? Why were solar panels taken off the White House? Because, right from the early days of the industry, the oil men and their obscene profits have had an unhealthy influence on the people running our country. And now they are the people running our country. And they're proving the cash too. Oil business isn't just in bed with the government, it is the government. So maybe after reading 2 of them, you're like, oh man, neither of them talked about this, I can get rid of that answer. Right? But we're going to keep looking at the other 2 to finish up our answer. Citizen 3. Millions of people a day are better off than they would have been without those trends and developments, without globalization, without the developments of increased international commerce. And that's all for the good. And very few people have been harmed by it. And then finally, Citizen 4. Strange. Watching these film fragments, it's like looking through binoculars, observing people on a far-off beach running around in circles, fixated on a small area of sand under their feet as a tsunami races towards the shore. So, A, economic liberalism is a rational and sustainable economic system. Are they questioning whether mankind is doing something that's rational and sustainable? B, humanitarianism. C, biosphere. And C, also consumer demands. It's about consumption. D, should we embrace globalization? Think about it for a second. Gonna respond to my email while we're doing this. I'll log in over here. So you may have that number 8 down to 2. Logically think through those two options and say, do all 4 of them talk about this, or do all 4 of them talk about that? And it is a question that takes a while. There's lots we read there. All right, so maybe number 9 is a little easier. Which of the citizens would most disagree with the perspective of the cartoonist from question 7? So now we go back to question 7, and we say, okay, number 7, really glitchy. Number 7, okay, yeah. Number 7 thought that. So put a pro or an anti on this ideological perspective. You know, if it's talking about sports, are they pro hockey, anti hockey? It's not talking about sports. It's talking about imperialism. It's talking about something, right? So are they pro or anti? And then looking at those 4 speakers, the question is, which one disagrees with the cartoonist the most? All right, let's move on to the next one. So number 10, 2 former US vice presidents are quoted here. One is Al Gore, who is famous for his awareness campaign regarding climate change. The other is Dick Cheney, former chairman and CEO, Chief Executive Officer of American Oil Transnational Halliburton. Based on the quotes, who's Al Gore and who's Dick Cheney? So go back, look for one that's, pro-corporation. That's Cheney. Look back and see who's pro-environmentalism and worried about the climate. That's Al Gore. Hopefully number 10 wasn't too easy. Let's go to number 11. Don't ask me why it's highlighted in yellow. Which of the following speakers would be least likely to support an initiative to attract big businesses like Walmart to locate in their community? So there's no source, just a question. We have 4 options. We got to say, okay, which one of these guys is least likely to want Walmart to come to our town? Corporations have gone global, and by going global, they have challenged the authority of corrupt governments. As an intended consequence, citizens exposed to economic freedom often demand and eventually achieve political and social freedom. B, corporations have no moral conscience. These are designed by law to be concerned only for their stockholders, and not say what are sometimes called their stakeholders, like the community or the workforce or whatever. So, being that I misread it the first time, corporations have no moral conscience. They are designed by law to be only concerned about their stockholders, so those who own a little bit of the corporation, and not say the stakeholders, the community that they work in. Although corporations have no moral obligations or social responsibilities, their employees and shareholders often shape their communities by being taxpayers and role models. And finally, all citizens, corporate or individual, are like puzzle pieces that have vital roles to play in communities. If you lose even one piece, the puzzle is incomplete. Which one is most anti-corporation? Which one would be most likely to say, I don't want Walmart to move to town? That's your answer for number 11. All right. You guys feeling pretty good so far? We're done about half the test. Keep in mind, you're going to have lots of time to go back over it. All right, so I look at this and I'm like, what? Right? I'm going to maybe dim the lights for a second, just because the background's black. And then I'll turn the lights back on so that you can see it on your page. I just want to highlight a few things here. So, obviously, I'm going to want to read the question first. But what I am seeing here is China's big, USA's big. I see different regions of the world in different colors. So European countries are kind of in that tan color. Asian countries are kind of in that purpley color. We've got other Asian countries that are more like Middle Eastern in that greeny color. It's a tough graph to look at in the beginning, right? There's lots going on. I can see that some boxes are bigger than others. So the USA, China boxes are bigger than India. And India is bigger than Belgium. Some boxes are so small that they don't have names attached to them. So there's lots going on there. And there's also lines. And I can see that China's got a ton of lines going to it. USA's got a ton of lines going to it. France has lines going to it, but less lines. Spain's got even less lines than France. So the lines, the boxes are different depending upon country. Sometimes boxes are bigger. Then I look at countries like India that have a massive population, bigger than the US, and India's box is smaller than the US, so it's not just population. So that's just some thoughts that I would have looking at the chart quickly. All right, let's take a peek at the question. Then there's another chart that shows GDP, gross domestic product of countries, and it shows that China is emerging and India is re-emerging and the United States' day is fading. Throughout history, it looks like there have been times when India was number one and China was number one. The United States has been dominant through much of my lifetime. So the circle diagram was most likely created. Okay, why was this diagram created? To show the comparative population sizes. Well, unfortunately, I think I gave that one away, right? Because I said India has more people than USA, but USA is bigger than India here, so it can't be that. The emergence of a homogenized world culture. So if you look at this and you see culture, then maybe that's it. The growing digital divide as a result of regional poverty. Have and have-nots of the internet. Is China the most plugged-in country in terms of technology in the US? And is Spain relatively not plugged in? Or finally, the extent of economic interconnectedness due to world trade. Are these the biggest traders in the world? Are these lines showing connections? If so, then it has to be that. Then number 13. Based on the trends from the chart, we should expect which of the following changes to future versions of source 1. So as we change this in the future, what might we see? Because of this, how might this change? Because of the trend we're seeing here, China, India becoming more important, US is becoming less, how might that change? Even greater number of lines connecting China with the rest of the world. A. B. Greater cooperation between India and China to minimize America's global influence. C. New challenge to China's Asian hegemony from Japan. So if Japan's rising here, then that's the answer. More commitment among the Europeans to reassert themselves by connecting with nations that remain on the periphery of the global village. All right, that's the halfway point of the test. So I might, if I was taking a test and not recording a video right now, I might give myself like a little break. But because we're recording a video and I'm starting to get a little worried that it's going to stop recording, it's going to crash, I think I'm going to push through. And being that we have 3 hours, I think I'm going to push through. So use the following sources for question 14. We've got hatred passed on from generation to generation. And I can't speak German, so I'm not going to read that. Befriedungsstraat. I nailed it, right? Step 2, we got 1973. We've got doves that represent peace. And we've got lots of countries of Europe. Step 3, we've got economic stuff happening. And step 4, we have over 25% of the world's science and technology and innovations happening in Europe, even though they have less than 5% of the people. And they seem pretty happy about it. For which of the following questions could the sources be most directly used for supporting evidence? Why are some members of the EU considering leaving it? So if you look at this and you see reasons why maybe Brexit and stuff like that, then A is your answer. Should nations put regional interests ahead of national interests? If in these sources you see that dilemma, are we British or are we European? Are we French or are we European? Then B is your answer. Can other regions of the world emulate the success story of the EU? So it's definitely focused on the EU, but if you see anything in here like, hey, North America's watching and it's like, can we do that? Then maybe that's your answer. If we change how we relate to others, can we create unforeseeable benefits? So, is there something in here that says, we used to relate in one way, and now we have some benefits that maybe we couldn't have predicted? If so, then that's your answer. Oh, too easy? Is that what you're saying? No. Okay, well then put a big question mark by it, and then go back to it. So you have these 4 options, and you have to say which of these 4 things fits with these 4 pictures. And there's only one. There's only one. So that might be one that you'll go back to when you have like almost 2 hours on your own, and you'll be like, you know what, I'll look at it, I'll look at the details specifically, I'll play a little matching game, and I'll see what I can come up with. Number 15 and 16. So we got this chart, shows US manufacturing jobs, and they crashed. So we're assuming that right around the time of the new millennium, less and less manufacturing jobs were in America. They lost like 5 million jobs. Between 95 and 2000, exports of assembled products in Mexico tripled, and the rate of industry's growth amounted to about 1 new factory per day. So jobs were leaving the US, jobs are going to Mexico. That's what I'm seeing. A proponent of economic liberalism. Guy likes free trade, guy likes capitalism. Would respond to the above sources with saying what? Support for source 1, so less jobs in America, because it highlights the decline of manufacturing jobs in the developed world where there's less need for jobs. So a proponent of capitalism would say, hey, that's great because Americans don't need jobs. If that makes sense, then pick A. Support for 2, jobs going to Mexico, because it reflects the growth of an area, Mexico, that has a comparative advantage, cheap labor, and this will benefit consumers and producers. If that's logical, then circle that. Opposition to 1, because it shows the threat of offshoring to American laborers. So would a proponent of free trade say, you know what, I don't like this because it's threatening offshore laborers, the threat that offshore shows to laborers, we shouldn't go offshore. Or D, opposition to source 2, because it shows the exporting of American values to other countries. So, man, I don't like this, because of this, Mexico is going to become Americanized. So the key is this: a proponent of economic liberalism, a proponent of free trade and capitalism. How would that person, Milton Friedman, Adam Smith, how would that person respond to these sources? So next up, number 16, in response to the above consequences of globalization. In response to the above consequences of globalization, this and this, so in response to these 2 sources, we should expect economic nationalists like Donald Trump. So economic nationalism means I don't like free trade, I want tariffs, I want to protect American businesses. Economic nationalists like Donald Trump to celebrate the growth of capitalism. So would Trump look at these 2 things and say, oh man, this is great. Capitalism's growing, that's a good thing. Or economic nationalists like Donald Trump to argue the need for protective tariffs and say, look, we're losing jobs, we need to protect our jobs. Why is Mexico getting all these factors? Let's make America great again. Or economic globalists like Justin Trudeau to celebrate the growth of capitalism, because capitalism and globalism are two of the loves of Trudeau apparently. Economic globalists like Justin Trudeau to claim this a victory for humanitarianism. If you see humanitarianism in its two sources, then maybe that's the answer. So again, it's a matching thing. All right, next up. Almost at the end, number 17 to 19. You got this picture. A guy lying in poverty on the side of the road, looks like he's a homeless guy, has very, very little possessions in the world, living on the brink of poverty and exposure to the elements. And we got this guy, it looks like he's got some money based upon his clothing, and he's looking the other way. He's gonna look the other way. According to a collectivist, the best solution to the problem, so first thing, what's the collectivist want to do? Second thing, what's the problem? Raised by this source would be a paradigm shift towards capitalism. So if collectivists like capitalism, that might be the answer. B, redefining the purpose of the economy. So would a collectivist say this economy is broken because it's not fulfilling the true purpose of an economy? Opening the nation to economic liberalism and interdependence. If a collectivist likes those two things, maybe the answer is C. Following the structural adjustment advice offered by the IMF and World Bank. There is a sad, obvious 3-1 split, meaning there's only one that fits collectivism here. So according to a collectivist, how do you deal with the problem of poverty? How do you deal with the problem of disparity, rich and poor? Okay, the end is near. After becoming aware of society's need to focus on the social progress index, in order to act as a citizen, a corporation would do something. So what would a corporation do if they're trying to act as a citizen to help people have more fulfilled lives? Argue that suffering is due to the lack of capitalism. Attempt to assist in a way that ensures those suffering have their basic needs met. Focus on their only goal, profit creation, and then allow that to trickle down to the poor. Realize that their only social responsibility is the creation of employment, and leave social issues to the state. After becoming aware of society's need to focus on the social progress index, in order to act as a citizen, what might a corporation do? So what might a corporation do if suddenly they have an epiphany and say, you know what, I need to help people get out of poverty? Next up, number 19, to continue the theme of the photo, but to change it from a micro personal level to a macro national level, the photo would be altered. Best to show what? So you got poor, rich. So nationally, is it the United States would be the poor one lying down and China is the rich one walking by? Or would it be the opposite? China's lying down, USA is walking by? Would it be the Sudan lying down and Germany walking by? Would it be Germany lying down and the Sudan walking by? Which one shows poverty as depicted in the cartoon? Or sorry, in the photograph? Number 20, we have a photo. It says equal jobs and educational opportunities. And we have a number of protesters in 1972. And from my first glance, it looks like they're all women. There might be a guy in there somewhere. I'm not seeing him. If there is, I don't know. This could be a guy. I don't see a head here. I have no idea. It looks like all women. And then we've got a report card. It's coming from how BC, so British Columbia, is measuring up in women's rights. And we're doing okay in some aspects and doing absolutely horrible in other aspects. There's still some violence against women. There's still women and girls in prison, women in housing. Maybe the worst is women and access to justice and social assistance in poverty. Lots of missing and murdered women in British Columbia. So, taken together, the sources show that in Canada, this and this. So in Canada, in BC, we've achieved gender equality. So if this looks like a final report card, now everything's good to you, then A is your answer. Our freedom is because of the action of governments. If you look at this and say women are free in Canada because government's done something to help them, then B is your answer. Men and women both need more human rights protection. If you see anything in here talking about men also in need of rights, then C is your answer. Although there have been some gains, if you see some gains, women continue to be marginalized. If you still see that women are not equal, then D is your answer. '21 to 22, we've got some pandemic stuff, but I went a little historical. I went with H1N1 instead of COVID-19. So you're welcome. You've heard enough about COVID-19. Considering the information in both sources, the dilemma most directly faced by nations living in the global village is that pandemics must be eliminated in a cost-effective manner. So you go up here, and if they're talking about money and how much it's going to cost, I don't see a dollar sign anywhere, just glancing, so maybe not. Problems in other nations may spread to and impact your own nation. That makes sense, right? Faced by nations in a global village. With interconnectedness comes many opportunities to attack other nations. Well, this isn't talking about terrorism, it's not talking about war, it's talking about pandemics. So unless we're using pandemics as we're weaponizing them, then it's probably not that. Modern technology is providing nations new biological and germ weapons to attack others. So if you see that, then apparently C and D are both right. So then you go back and you read through it. On April 30th, 2009, the European Union's 27 health ministers held an emergency meeting in Luxembourg to coordinate national measures to prevent the spread of H1N1 influenza virus. France pushed to suspend all European Union flights to Mexico, where thousands of infections have been confirmed. Cases of H1N1 have also been confirmed in Britain, Spain, Germany, and Austria. On May 8th, 2009, the University of Western Ontario, in reaction to the H1N1 flu outbreak, prohibited non-necessary university-related travel to Mexico. The goal of this action was to limit exposure of faculty, staff, and students to the flu. So, once again, if you see money, it's A. If you see problems from one country maybe spreading to others, it's B. If you see some weaponizing of the virus, then it's C and D. And you can only pencil that. For which of the following questions could the sources be most directly used as supporting evidence? So, you can ask a question, you say, oh man, this is the evidence. Do pandemics present a threat to international trade organizations? So if they talk about trade organizations, then A is your answer. How have human rights been managed during emerging pandemics? So if you can see human rights being potentially limited, then B is your answer. So you got to go back and say, okay, is there any implicit or explicit mentioning of human rights? So it might not say freedom of speech, but if it says censorship, then it's still talking about that. That's just one example. Are medical practices responsible for the global nature of pandemics? Or are they blaming hospitals and stuff? Should nations develop biological and germ weapons as a deterrence? So again, if you pick D here, you're probably going to pick D down here. But if you didn't pick D up here, then don't pick D down here. The end is near. So once we get through all 25, we're going to go outside, we're going to have a mask break, and then you can come back in and work until lunch on this, and then you have that almost hour after lunch as well. Now we have a cartoon, and it says global warming. It's a microwave. You have a family inside the microwave, probably not a good place to be. Symbolism can be discovered in this cartoon by the husband is sitting while the wife does all the housework. You just want to circle that, right? You know, men are evil. B, the microwave is set to global warming, and we are all locked in with no escape. That's symbolism. Sorry, what? Oh. They live in a microwave, a toxic and ultimately deadly environment of their own consumer creation. Sometimes I just look at sentences that I've wrote in the past and I'm like, what? The husband and child are ignorant of their environment because they are distracted by the book, which is escapism. Symbolic of escapism. So now you gotta say, okay, there's all of these are talking about symbolism. But what's the main message of the cartoon? What's the main symbolism there? And I think the answer should slap you in the face. Two more to go. Which of the following responses to Isaac Asimov, and you might be saying, oh man, I have no idea who Isaac Asimov is. Don't worry, the answer's still on the page. Which of the following responses to Asimov's claim regarding overpopulation that we can either control our numbers or let nature increase the human death rate? That's all we need to know about Asimov is that. Either we deal with overpopulation or nature is going to do something so we all die, or a lot of us die, would be most acceptable to citizens in a democracy. So what about that would be most acceptable to people who like freedom? This is going to be tough. Not very long from now, we'll see wars over water. It will be more important than oil. Even now, we can see how little people think of it and how much they waste it. So would somebody in a democracy be like, man, I can't wait for those water wars? B, whether driving their cars or using planes for transnational business, or even their computers in light of our finite carrying capacity, we need to rethink the ecological impact of our daily lifestyle choices. Does that sound like somebody in a democracy might say that? The only real solution is to reestablish, but at a global scale, forced sterilization. Does that sound like a democracy guy? Pro-freedom. Let's sterilize everyone. Hey, no overpopulation now. Or we should discourage large families by taking away the child tax credit or having a sliding scale of increased taxes when people have more than 2 kids. So we're going to tax big families. We're going to sterilize people. We're going to try to deal with our consumer choices to minimize our ecological footprint. We're going to go to war and get what we need. What's most likely? Somebody who values freedom. One last question. Number 25, we got this guy eating lots. We get this guy not eating a lot. And he looks to the other guy and says, sorry, it's a hard time. So we can infer that he's not going to share. We can infer that there's disparity. That's very explicit. We can see the disparity. That's an explicit thing. Oh, crap. But we can infer that he's not going to share. So hopefully I didn't give away the answer. Considering the details within the source, the cartoonist is attempting to address poverty, disparity, sustainability, or interdependence. So that's the last one. And I'm going to stop recording before it crashes, and you're going to get a chance to go outside.